Look, make fun of me all you want. At least I'm dressed for the occasion. Hello! Welcome to the Matsunoki Cafe. I'm Shiro, the owner. Here I like to talk about just whatever is considered nerdy or nostalgic that's on our minds, whether it be video games, TV shows, or movies. So, whether you're new here or a returning customer, why don't you stick around and enjoy the conversation with your cup of joe? I feel the best way to start this video is to firmly establish what it is and, more importantly, what it isn't. This isn't a hit piece on Pokemon as a series. I still enjoy the games, even if I don't have the same passion for them as I did when I was a kid. I'm not going to blame the developers for how these games are getting shipped out in buggy, unfinished states or with little content that doesn't really justify a $70 price tag. Mainline Pokemon games are usually released once every year. I don't know what the working process is at Game Freak or the Pokemon Company when making these games. Despite all the faults recent mainline entries have had, I want to give the actual dev team the benefit of the doubt that they try to make the best possible products in the relatively short time frame they're given. I just want to make it clear that this video is about my experiences with Pokemon growing up and how my feelings towards the franchise have changed for better and worse. To give some context, my first Pokemon game was Emerald on the GBA. I was 3 years old when I got it as a birthday present, so I didn't go far since I could barely read. I played Diamond a year later, then unfortunately skipped Platinum before playing Heart Gold for the first time in the year 8 came out. It was Heart Gold and later Pokemon White that truly got me hooked on this franchise when I was little. And by hooked, I mean obsessed. Like, it was a problem, I'm not gonna lie. I was the annoying kid who was reading about Egyptian pyramids in 5th grade history and pointing out a picture of Anubis being like, "Yo, that's Lucario!" While I did play other games like Sonic, Kingdom Hearts, and Larry Boy and the Bad Apple for the Game Boy Advance, Pokemon was the game series that was my top priority for me for a good portion of my childhood. I never kept up with the anime much though, I was more focused on following new episodes of Ben 10 back then, but that's a show for another video. But then, as the years went on, I lost my obsession with Pokemon, which is a blessing in disguise, knowing how bad it got. I don't think about the series or keep up with it anywhere near as much as I used to. Even though I'm an adult with my own money, I've never gone out of my way to buy the newer mainline entries. The relegated items I put on a Christmas list every year. If a relative gets me the game, I'll play it. If I don't, oh well, I'll play something else. I was looking back on it, wondering what made me start to expand my tastes in video games beyond being primarily set on Pokemon. First, I thought it might have been the same reason a lot of other people started falling out of love with Pokemon, the transition of mainline games from 2D graphics to 3D. People wish Pokemon would go back to the glory days of being 2D, even though there were just as many people who were asking Pokemon to make the transition to 3D already during the DS era. That couldn't be it, as I remember being super excited for X and Y and the Hoenn remakes. Then it dawned on me. Another obsession I've had since I was a kid was YouTube. Yes, I've been hyperfixated on the very platform you're watching this video on for as long as I can remember. At least, I assume you're watching this video on YouTube. I don't know where else you can find this. Who knows, maybe you found this video on Pornhub of all places because someone decided to upload it there. You do you. I watch YouTube day in and day out because it was just the perfect place to find content on everything else my child self was obsessed with. I would watch videos about the cartoons and shows I was a fan of, and for the purpose of this video, I watch a lot of YouTube content focused on Pokemon. PokeTubers such as MNJTV, Tomohiro, Munching Orange, those guys were my childhood, and in case any of you are watching or even reacting to this video, I started watching you guys when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and now here I am at 20, wearing a Pikachu hoodie. How you feeling? Another YouTuber I grew up watching was the J-Wits. Up until 2013, he focused his content primarily around Pokemon like everyone else I listed. Here's the difference. In 2013, he expanded his content to covering Nintendo games and not just Pokemon. I think seeing his videos about Mario cameos and Zelda and the worst Zelda dungeons was what led me to exploring and playing other game franchises from age 10 onwards. Next thing you know, I'm discovering and experiencing a ton of different series on both Nintendo systems and eventually the PS4 that I have fallen in love with. And I think playing through all these games kind of snowballed and made me finally develop a more realistic viewpoint to examine Pokemon games. I now had a ton of non-Pokemon games to compare them to. Pokemon is pretty basic when it comes to general gameplay, though the spice comes from team building and all the small hidden mechanics like EVs and IVs. Those are why there's such a competitive scene with Pokemon that's still in effect to this day. But games like Persona and Octopath show how turn-based combat can still be good while having more complex mechanics on the surface level. The recent open world games in the series are alright, but I've been spoiled by Xenoblade and the Insomniac Spider-Man games in terms of open world content. Heck, games like Tales of Berseria and Kingdom Hearts show how RPG mechanics can be applied to fun, real-time action combats. It was also through playing all those different games that I realized the mainline Pokemon games are not great with storytelling. Generations 5 and 9 have decent stories with good moments, but neither of them are fantastic, you feel me? And this isn't me being like, oh, it's rated E for everyone. Obviously a story for kids is mid. Of course not. You can have great video game stories while still being rated E. For example, the Mega Man Zero games. Yes, the recent Legacy Collection is rated T for teen, but a majority of the Zero games were individually rated E for everyone, and so was the DS Collection I happen to own. Regardless of the age range, the narrative of the Zero games is really great. Heck, even the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon titles have some actually great stories and show the storytelling potential the mainline games rarely tap into. And again, the story told in black and white plus its sequels are the best story Pokemon has to offer in terms of mainline games, with Gen 9 also having a good contender for that spot. But there are still notable issues that keep those stories from me seeing them as something beyond, yeah, it was good. The big issue is most villain teams make no sense. Team Rocket just wants to take over the world, which is fine enough. They're meant to be basic Saturday morning cartoon villains. But most villain teams after Rocket want to reshape the world into something they deem better. Why do they want to fix the world though? That's not rhetorical, I'm legitimately asking. Because as a player, pretty much the entire Pokemon world is presented almost like a utopia. Yeah, there are some creepy or scary Pokedex entries, and some locations in various regions have some sad lore, but for the most part, I'm seeing a beautiful fantasy world. I don't see anything that would compel someone like Lysander to commit genocide in some weird attempt to preserve natural beauty. Take Generation 3 as another example. Maxie wants to expand the land masses of the planet, and Archie wants to expand the sea. Why do they want that? For all any of us know, the reason Maxie wants to expand the amount of land is because he never learned how to swim. My guess is as good as yours, honestly, because we have nothing to work off of. A majority of villains and antagonists in these games also suffer from a lack of personality. A lot of the evil team leaders are stoic, no-nonsense bad guys who have no discernible personality trait other than an angry glare. That's why N is the most compelling antagonist in all the mainline games. He has a motivation that makes sense, a pretty sad backstory, and a clear-cut personality. Plus, he's also hot as fuck. Gen 5 then gave us Colress, another great example of an antagonist in this Pokemon world. His motivation to research how to draw out a Pokemon's true strength is rather unique compared to antagonists who have come before and after him. He even admits he only joined Team Plasma to further his own research. He isn't loyal at all to Ghetsis. When you look at the characters that have been introduced in the last few generations, it's insane to see how much wasted potential there is with these games' stories. Generation 7 is the perfect example of what I mean. Guzma, Kui, Lily, Gladion, many of the trial captains even, they're all good characters with fun designs and personalities, but are wasted. I cannot name you a single memorable moment in the story for a majority of Alola's cast, even though I can describe to you what their general personality is. That's how weird this issue is. Lusamine, specifically Sun and Moon, is honestly a good villain for this series. And no, I don't just say that because I'm a simp. Her motivation of losing a loved one is one of the more sympathetic motivations any of the villains have. And just like with Ghetsis, her presence in the story is heightened by her connection to Lily and Gladion. She's the central antagonist in Sun and Moon, and while she's definitely insane, the ending of those games show that she wasn't beyond redemption. All she needed was a wake-up call from her daughter during the big battle in Ultra Space to come to her senses and start improving as a person. Now, how did Ultra Sun and Moon ruin this? Well, for one thing, Lusamine isn't the big antagonist of the story anymore. It's Necrozma. Having a legendary Pokemon be the central opposition isn't a bad idea. The first movie proved that having a Pokemon as the main threat can work. But by changing who the big bad is in the remakes, they stripped Lusamine of what made her interesting. I mean, yeah, Giratina kind of got a little shoehorned in Platinum's story, but still kept Cyrus as the big bad, you know what I mean? Lucimene's goal is no longer to conquer Ultra Space due to the loss of a loved one driving her mad. Now she's helping the Ultra Recon Squad save the multiverse from Mr. Prism Demon. And she and Guzma get slapped by Necrozma, the Recon Squad yell at her for doing a bad job, then she admits Nebby's bear off with Lily before they go home together. That's it. She doesn't have a redemption arc. She and Guzma were reduced to jobbers to establish Necrozma as a threat. But they already established as threatening by the fact it fused with the legendary we just evolved and then became a dragon. You already had a decent story in the original pair of games. Why'd you ruin it? Why? If you can't tell, I'm the type of person who enjoys a good story in video games. That's one of the reasons I primarily play RPGs. Despite that, in cases like Fire Emblem Engage, I'm willing to forgive flaws in a game's story to an extent if it's fun to play. It's not that I ignore the flaws, just that I like to acknowledge both its strengths and weaknesses. I say all this because it's obvious the dev team behind Pokemon did want to put more of their eggs into the storytelling basket, so to speak. Unless you've been living under a rock since Generation 9 released, you know that those games got, let's be nice and say, mixed reception on launch. These games are packed full of glitches and issues, which is objectively unforgivable. Scarlet and Violet should not have been shipped out in this state at all. The towns also feel really barren, a problem that has been getting worse and worse with each generation since we entered 3D. We hit the apex of this problem in SV because unless it's story important, you cannot enter any of the buildings in Paldea's cities. The cities have been reduced to different looking backdrops and pretty much nothing more. However, to acknowledge the game's merits, the general gameplay is honestly really good. When everything's working right, that is. This game and Legends Arceus before it are the first games in the series that ever made it feel fun for me to explore and catch as many Pokemon as possible. In prior games, I completed the Pokedex because it was something to do after you beat the game. But I actually felt compelled to do it here. The cast of characters populating Paldea are fun and memorable, from the gym leaders to the teachers and classmates at the academy. What helps the cast even more is that the story in these games is unironically pretty good. As I mentioned earlier, Scarlet and Violet are only behind Gen 5 in telling one of the better stories across the entire mainline series. This has to do with how the game is structured differently from all prior games, being able to put more focus and provide more depth to important characters like Nemona and especially Arven. But the biggest issue with the story isn't any of its concepts, it's the execution. I'm sure you've heard this complaint somewhere before, but Pokemon Scarlet and Violet do not have voice acting. This is another issue people have had with Pokemon as of recently. Pretty much every other AAA video game includes voice acting, yet Pokemon is the one lacking behind by not implementing such a feature. And it really shows when Pokemon came to the Switch, where Gens 8 and 9 have these dynamic cutscenes, but the dialogue is still unvoiced. In the final area of Scarlet and Violet, there is auto-advancing dialogue occurring between characters while you're moving around. Don't do that unless dialogue is voiced! Video game voice acting has also gotten much better over the years. We're currently at a point where acting in video games is generally good, if not amazing, so bad voice acting isn't much of an excuse to not include voiceovers at all at this point. Even if the dev team only gets a fraction of the profits made from all avenues of Pokemon merchandise, the games should have enough of a budget to hire a voice director and a wide selection of talent to voice cutscenes. They don't need to voice every piece of dialogue in the entire game for 9 different languages either. They can do something like Neo the World Ends With You, where only the plot important cutscenes are voiced. Japanese and English audio is serviceable enough for voiceovers, as that's the practice for every JRPG in the modern day, from Final Fantasy to Fire Emblem. Spin-offs like Detective Pikachu and even Pokemon Masters, the damn gacha game, are perfect examples of how characters are easily brought to life when you have people behind a booth. I don't hate Pokemon just because there are better games out there. Even if I don't enjoy playing the modern games myself much, I've replayed some of the DS games and had fun with them. What I do enjoy most about the franchise as an adult is stuff outside of the games. I still watch Pokemon videos on YouTube whenever they pop up in my recommended. I'm still watching MNJTV and I think his recent content is some of his best stuff. I've watched Alpharad's Pokemon Challenge videos multiple times now, because Jacob is one of the funniest people on the internet, but also I enjoy watching Nuzlocke and challenge videos like that. Toyoroki, a Twitter artist who primarily draws Pokemon characters, is one of my main inspirations as an artist. In terms of officially licensed stuff, I'm a big fan of the Pokemon Adventures manga. I reread the Ruby and Sapphire arc a while back and I loved it. This manga shows the storytelling potential Pokemon really has. Yeah, a lot of the villains are still pretty basic, with the exception of a few who regularly return, but the main cast of Pokedex holders are super well written and always feel unique from each other. Please, if you have any interest in Pokemon as a franchise, read this entire series. I may not love the franchise itself as much as I used to, but I adore what it can inspire people to create. That's why I titled the video as me having a love-hate relationship with Pokemon. I think we've all gone through this sort of phase, where we fall out of love for a series just because we grew up and expanded our palette for media. I still enjoy that franchise as an adult, but not to the same extent you did as a kid. For me, Pokemon is one of multiple franchises I went through this with. It may have been something else for you, the viewer. Let me know in the comments what series that is for you. I'd love to read what you may have to say. Hell, it doesn't even have to be a franchise you got into as a kid. Maybe you've fallen out of love with a show or game you got into as a teenager or young adult. Don't be afraid to expand the list of media you enjoy and end up discovering something new that you'll love. That's basically the moral I want to leave this video off on. Thank you for coming by the Matsunoki Cafe today. Hopefully the Pokemon community doesn't cancel me for not loving every aspect of the series. This was a passion project for me since Pokemon has been a series I've known my whole life, so I'd very much appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribe to the channel. As a smaller creator, subscribing would seriously help me out. But that's it from me. Until next time, stay safe out there. Now I can fucking take this goddamn hoodie off. It's so goddamn uncomfortable. It barely even fits me.